A tiger doesn't hate you. A lion doesn't plan revenge. And a bear doesn't lie awake thinking about the people who wandered into its territory last summer. Animals react to the world exactly as they're built to. Nothing more. What changes the outcome is us. The line we cross, the fence we climb, the rope barrier we step past because we figure the warning doesn't apply to us that day. In every story here, a person made a choice that broke a rule, written for a reason, and paid for it in full. And in every story, an animal paid too, shot dead, put down, or left carrying the weight of an instinct nobody asked it to use. This isn't about mocking the people who died. It's about watching how thin the gap really is between an ordinary afternoon and a fatal one. Here are 5 cases of people who provoked, invaded, or misjudged dangerous animals and never got a second chance. It is December 25th, 2007, at the San Francisco Zoo in California. Christmas afternoon, families walking the paths between exhibits. And at the Tiger Grotto, a Siberian tiger named Tatiana, pacing behind a moat wall that visitors assumed was tall enough to hold her. It wasn't the first time Tatiana had drawn blood. A year earlier, in 2006, she'd bitten off part of a zookeeper's arm during a public feeding, an incident investigated by federal regulators at the time. The keeper survived, but the message in it was plain. This was a tiger that would reach through the bars of the arrangement around her the moment that arrangement gave her the opening. The zoo read the 2006 incident as a failure of feeding protocol, corrected the procedure, and kept her on public display anyway. That afternoon, 17-year-old Carlos Sousa Jr. was at the grotto with brothers Kulbir and Paul Dhaliwal, then 23 and 19. Investigators later concluded the 3 had been taunting the tiger, throwing pine cones, dangling their feet over the railing into the enclosure. Some accounts mentioned a slingshot, though that detail was never confirmed and remains disputed. What isn't disputed is the moat wall itself. It measured roughly 12.5 feet, well under the 16.4-foot minimum recommended by the Association of Zoos and Aquariums for a cat built like Tatiana. The standard existed because a tiger's legs can do things most visitors never think about standing at a railing. She proved it that day. Tatiana scaled the wall, got out of the enclosure, and killed Sousa a short distance away. Then she didn't stop. She tracked the Dhaliwal brothers through the zoo grounds, by scent, by blood, for roughly 300 yards, catching up to them near the Terrace Cafe and mauling them both. Police arrived to a scene already in chaos. One officer's account, recorded afterward, described the tiger closing the distance fast, breaking into something close to a run, coming to within 2.5 feet of him before he opened fire. It took multiple rounds. Tatiana went down and didn't get back up. In the aftermath, toxicology reports reportedly showed marijuana and alcohol in the systems of the young men involved. The zoo's director resigned. The Dhaliwal brothers, who'd initially denied provoking the animal, later settled a civil lawsuit against the zoo for $900,000 in 2009, and Sousa's family reached a settlement of its own on undisclosed terms. The USDA fined the zoo $1,275 for the enclosure flaws that had let her out, and investigators found fresh claw marks near the top of the moat wall. The physical record of a tiger doing exactly what the barrier had been built on the assumption she never could. Buried in the federal investigation was a detail that didn't make the final report. A tiger expert who examined the scene wrote that she couldn't imagine a tiger attempting that jump unless provoked. That line got stripped from the official version, described by a spokesperson as irrelevant to the enforcement question at hand. Irrelevant to the paperwork, maybe, not irrelevant to what happened. When the grotto eventually reopened, it did so only after the wall was raised higher and topped with glass. The barrier finally rebuilt to hold a cat that had already shown everyone what she was capable of. Tatiana was an animal capable of clearing distances far greater than 12.5 feet, kept behind a wall that assumed she'd never have a reason to try. Someone gave her one. In 2024, at Parque Zoobotânico Arruda Câmara in João Pessoa, Brazil, a public zoo locals call Bica, a Sunday morning crowd moved between exhibits the way crowds do at any zoo. Nobody there expected to watch a man die. Gerson de Melo Machado was 19. he climbed an outer structure at the edge of the lioness enclosure, a barrier standing roughly 18 feet high, and he did it in plain view of other visitors walking the path below. This wasn't a stumble near an edge or a foot that slipped on wet concrete. It took real effort, hand over hand up the structure, over the top, then across to a tree, growing inside the enclosure itself, and down the trunk to the ground where the lioness lived. Every part of it required a choice, made again and again, for as long as the climb took. The lioness was lying near the glass at the front of the enclosure when he came down the tree. She noticed him fast. Visitors nearby started shouting before she even reached him, and someone was already filming. The video would circulate within hours, a crowd's voices rising as she crossed the ground toward Machado, the moment he realized what was closing in on him, the moment the branches stopped hiding what came next. Zoo staff and emergency crews responded as fast as they could, get through the gates and around the enclosure wall. It wasn't fast enough. By the time anyone reached him, the mauling had already turned fatal. What came out afterward changed how the story read. Machado had a documented history of mental illness, and a child welfare counselor in the state of Paraíba said she'd worked with him for 8 years through the city's institutional care system. Reports later said his mother and grandparents had schizophrenia, and that psychiatrists had repeatedly classified his own condition as a behavioral problem rather than something requiring hospitalization. A month before he climbed into that enclosure, a state court had ordered him interned at a psychiatric treatment facility. Officials never located him to carry it out. He dreamed, by the counselor's account, of taming lions in Africa. He'd once cut through an airport fence trying to sneak aboard a plane he believed was headed there. The zoo's response to the lioness came fast and clear. She would not be euthanized. Officials said she'd shown no aggression outside the context of that single encounter, that she was healthy, that she'd be monitored through what staff called a period of high stress for the animal. A zoo veterinarian described the incident as something entirely outside any scenario the park had planned for. Officials in their public statement used one word for what happened: sad. The debate that followed online split along a familiar line, the same one that shows up after every one of these deaths. Some demanded the animal be put down for what it had done. Others pointed out the obvious, that the lioness had never left her enclosure, never sought anyone out, and had simply been present when a person lowered himself into the one space on Earth where her instincts, and not the rules of the zoo, were the law. That single word, sad, carries a lot of weight for how little it says. A young man cycled through 8 years of child welfare oversight, a court order for treatment that nobody enforced, and a documented plan for containment that arrived a month too late to matter, ended up climbing into a lioness enclosure in broad daylight while a crowd watched. The lioness did what a lioness does when something drops into her space uninvited. Nobody blames her for that. Not the zoo, not the public. The system that was supposed to reach Machado before that Sunday didn't, and an animal that never asked for any of it was left carrying the outcome of a failure that had nothing to do with her. It is September 20th, 2025, at Growler Pines Tiger Preserve near Hugo, Oklahoma, a private facility tucked into 25 acres of Choctaw County, the kind of place where visitors pay for a guided tour and a chance to stand close to something most people only see behind glass. Ryan Easley ran it. He was 37, a familiar name in Oklahoma's private big cat circles, a world small enough that everyone in it eventually crosses paths with everyone else. Easley had done business at one point with Joseph Maldonado, the man the world knows as Joe Exotic, whose old roadside zoo sat not far from Growler Pines before it shut down. Easley built his own compound on the same patch of Oklahoma ground, and by most accounts he meant it to last. The tiger that killed him wasn't new to him. He'd raised it, fed it, handled it, watched it grow into an adult animal that had known no life other than the one Easley gave it. That mattered to people who knew him. It's part of why what happened felt, to them, so hard to square. The attack came during a demonstration, one built around taking paw print impressions, a routine meant to show visitors the size and shape of a tiger's foot up close. It's the kind of activity a handler like Easley had likely walked through more times than anyone counted. The Tiger Cooperative, the crowd a few feet back, Nothing about the moment suggesting anything was wrong. Then it went wrong. According to the county sheriff, the tiger unexpectedly began to bite and shake easily while the two were inside a large cage, and it happened in front of onlookers, among them his own wife and young daughter. He was already dead by the time deputies, Hugo police, and paramedics reached the preserve. Growler Pines posted its statement on Facebook, the words "careful and grieving." They called it an accident. They wrote that the tragedy stood as a painful reminder of both the beauty and unpredictability of the natural world. They said easily understood the risks, not out of recklessness but out of love, that the animals under his care weren't just animals to him but beings he'd built a relationship with, rooted in respect and daily care. A wildlife commentator asked to weigh in publicly offered a different kind of read. The tiger, in this telling, didn't want to kill him. It reacted the way tigers react, a paw swipe thrown out on instinct, not predatory intent, the kind of motion that costs nothing to a 400-pound animal and everything to the person standing in its path. Years of familiarity don't cancel out that math. A swipe is a swipe, whether it comes from an animal a handler has known for 1 day or 12 years. PETA weighed in fast, and their statement didn't soften anything. No human, they argued, is ever safe standing that close to an apex predator, no matter how much trust has been built over the years, no matter how gentle the animal has always seemed. The organization had criticized Easley before his death, accusing him of running tigers through circus performances and keeping them in cramped enclosures at Maldonado's old zoo. His death, in their framing, wasn't a freak accident. It was what happens eventually when the arrangement is close contact with a predator built to kill things much larger than a house cat. Easley's world had been shrinking for years before that Saturday. In December of 2022, the United States passed the Big Cat Public Safety Act, a federal law that banned the private ownership of big cats by most people and outlawed the cub petting and pay-to-play encounters that roadside operations had run for decades. The whole business model Joe Exotic had made famous, hands-on time with tigers for a paying crowd, was exactly what the law was written to end. Places like Growler Pines survived in the narrowing space it left behind, still built around the one thing that had always made the money and always carried the risk, a person and an apex predator sharing the same few feet of ground. Growler Pines went quiet after that. Tours and animal encounters, the very things that had brought people out to that stretch of Oklahoma for years, got canceled, and within weeks the preserve announced it was closing for good. No promise of reopening, just a preserve full of tigers that had lost the one person they'd known their whole lives, and a gate that stayed shut. It is October 4th, 2009, in Ross Township, Pennsylvania, a wooded stretch of the Pocono Mountains about 20 miles northeast of Allentown. A Sunday evening, quiet, the kind of rural property where the nearest thing to a spectacle is whatever the neighbors keep in the backyard. On this one, the backyard was the spectacle. Over the years it had held a lion, a cougar, a jaguar, a tiger, a leopard, 2 servals, and a black bear, a private collection of apex predators fenced into a corner of the Pennsylvania woods. The animals belonged to a household that treated them as part of the family. Michael Walls held a license as an exotic animal dealer, one he'd carried since the mid-1990s, though his permit to keep and sell the animals had quietly lapsed in June of 2008. Authorities would later call the expired paperwork a technicality. It was the arrangement underneath the paperwork that mattered. Kellyanne Walls was 37. The bear was a 350-pound American black bear the family had raised from a cub, 9 years of feeding it, cleaning up after it, watching it grow from something you could hold into something that filled a 15 by 15-foot cage of steel and concrete. 9 years is a long time, long enough for a routine to feel like a relationship, for a dangerous animal to become, in the language of a household, a pet with a name. That Sunday, around 5 in the evening, Kelly went into the cage to clean it. She had a method, the same one she'd used many times before. Throw a shovelful of dog food to one side to pull the bear away, then clean the other side while it ate. It was a system built entirely on the assumption that a 350-pound predator, given something to chew on, would stay where it was put. This time, it didn't. The bear left the food, turned, and went for her. Her 2 young children were there. So were a neighbor's children. They saw the whole thing, and it was their shouting that brought help. A neighbor grabbed a gun, ran to the cage, and shot the bear while it was still on top of her. The animal died there. Kellyanne Walls was pronounced dead at the scene, killed in a backyard enclosure on her own property, in front of her kids, by an animal the family had trusted for nearly a decade. Pennsylvania did allow residents to keep exotic and wild animals under permit, which is how a single household ended up with a menagerie most small zoos would envy. A permit, though, only governs paperwork and caging. It cannot legislate the moment a keeper decides the animal is calm enough to share a cage with, and it was that decision, repeated across 9 years until it stopped feeling like a decision at all, that finally went wrong. A supervisor with the Pennsylvania Game Commission put it about as plainly as it can be put. "These things are not tame animals," he said. "They're wild animals." The sentence sounds obvious written down. It stops sounding obvious the moment a cub grows up in your house, learns your voice, takes food from your hand, and never once, across 9 years, gives you a reason to be afraid. That's exactly how the trap closes. Familiarity feels like safety. It isn't the same thing, and a bear doesn't know the difference between a person it has known for 9 years and a person it has known for 9 minutes when there's food on the ground and a body standing between it and more. The license had expired. The cage was solid steel and concrete. None of that was the point. The point was that somewhere along the way, a wild animal had been folded so far into the daily life of a family that stepping into its cage felt like a chore instead of a gamble. It was a gamble every single time. It just took 9 years to come due, and it came due with her children close enough to watch. It is January 2019 at a pearl farm in Minahasa, in the North Sulawesi province of Indonesia. The facility, CV Yoshiki Laboratory, bred pearls for a living and was owned by a Japanese businessman. It was not, on paper, in the business of keeping predators, but behind a concrete wall on the grounds lived a saltwater crocodile named Mary, roughly 5 meters long and around 600 kilograms, close to 1,500 pounds of the largest reptile predator on Earth, kept without the permits Indonesian law requires for a protected species. Dizituo was 44, the head of the laboratory. She was known among her colleagues as someone who loved animals, and she often took on the job of feeding the crocodile herself. Feeding Mary had a procedure. Staff would stand at the enclosure wall and pat the top of it to draw the crocodile over, coax it to open its mouth, and toss meat down into its jaws from above. The wall did all the work of keeping a person and a 5-meter crocodile on opposite sides of the same few feet of air. The system worked as long as the crocodile stayed where you thought it was. On this day, by the account of a former feeder at the facility, it may not have. The theory that emerged afterward was that DC leaned over the wall with the meat and patted the concrete to call the animal, not realizing Mary was already directly beneath her, already in position, already looking up. A saltwater crocodile does not need a running start. It needs proximity and a target above the waterline, and for a fraction of a second it had both. Indonesia records more fatal crocodile attacks than any country on Earth, most of them in the rivers, mangroves, and estuaries where wild saltwater crocs and people share the same brown water without a wall between them. Almost none of them look like this one. Deezy wasn't fishing off a riverbank or wading through a tidal channel. She was at work at a pearl laboratory, feeding an animal that had been kept there on purpose, behind concrete, killed by very likely the one crocodile in the whole province whose exact location was supposed to be known at every hour of the day. She didn't come back that evening, and nobody knew yet why. Her colleagues found her the next morning. Her body was in the pond inside the enclosure, dismembered, both arms gone, the crocodile still nearby. What had been a feeding routine one afternoon had become a recovery operation by the next. It took effort to get Mary out. The animal was sedated and eventually hauled from the enclosure, an operation that reportedly needed a crowd of people and heavy equipment to move something that size, then taken to a wildlife sanctuary in the city of Bitung. Police, meanwhile, went looking for the farm's owner, because keeping a protected, wild-caught crocodile of that size without a permit is itself against the law in Indonesia. The animal that killed DC-20 should not legally have been there at all. That's the part worth sitting with. A saltwater crocodile is not a dangerous animal in the way a height or a fast car is dangerous. It is a dedicated ambush predator, an animal whose entire body plan, across tens of millions of years, has been refined toward a single trick. Stay invisible, stay still, and close the distance faster than the thing above the water can react. Everything about it is built for the exact moment DC leaned over that wall. The routine treated Mary as a fixture, a heavy, slow-moving thing on the far side of a barrier that you topped up the way you'd feed a pond. Mary was never a fixture. It was a 5-meter predator being handed dinner by the one arrangement that put a person within reach of it every single day, and it only ever had to be a crocodile once. None of these 5 stories needed to happen. Every cage wall, every distance rule, every locked gate exists because someone, somewhere, already learned the lesson the hard way and tried to make sure it wouldn't repeat. It repeated anyway, and in each case, an animal carried the cost too. Shot, killed, or left holding an instinct that was never its fault to begin with. The barrier was never the insult. It was the only thing standing between an ordinary day and the end of one.